Dare great things for Christ. Christ calls us to dare great things. In the marketplace, as well as in the mission field, there has never been a time like the present for the spirit of the Catholic entrepreneur. Now is the time for men and women of great courage and great vision to engage our church and our culture. Now is the time to dare great things. And here is your host as we dare great things, Father Nathan Cromley, the president and founder of the St. John Institute.
Everyone who tries to do something new has to go through the pain of actually doing it. Ideas are one thing, inspiration is another, but execution is where things really happen. And executing on an idea carries with it a burden, the sacrifice of the grind. Is it possible to stay happy even when toiling? What happens to a Christian's joy when they embrace the grind? And how can we embrace the grind in a way that not only maintains our joy, but allows it to expand? Well, I certainly hope all of you are enjoying this latest class we're doing here. This session is all about the secrets to joyful leadership, and I felt it was necessary to do because, of course, everything that we do at the St. John Leadership Network is all about people becoming Christian at work and living their Christian faith at work. And it's so important that we do so, not only for ourselves, but for the workplace and for other people, that we evangelize and we bring the good news of Jesus with us through our example, through our lifestyle at work. And when you think about that, of course, that includes being joyful. Why? Because as Thomas Aquinas teaches us, joy is a property that belongs to the charity that is in the soul of a Christian. So I know that that's a little bit complicated for most of us, but what he's saying is that when the love of God is in somebody, they will have joy. Joy is like the awareness that God is inside of you, that you are reaching your life's goal, that things are aligned, and that you're sharing right now in the end goal towards which everyone will be striving. I mean, you're joyful because you know you're in a good place. And Aquinas says a Christian is always supposed to be in a good place because by our faith, we're literally able to pierce through all of the clouds of unknowing, all of the difficulties of life, and see at work the hand of God in our own life. That ought to make us joyful. It might not make us happy, right? It might not be enough to take away the pain. We're going to still carry the cross all the days of our life, but is it possible to carry the cross and still have joy? I mean, was Jesus Christ, for example, ever bereft of joy? Now, on one hand, you'd say, of course he was. He sweated blood in the garden. They beat him cruelly in his passion. And finally, he died on a cross. So you don't want to say that that's the picture of, of happiness on earth. But that's what I'm trying to get at. Joy is not the same as happiness. Happiness can be an emotional thing. Happiness can come, happiness can go. If we eat right and we exercise right and we have a lot of things in our life, then we can say that we're in fact happy, but we might be happy and not joyful. Joyful is a very specific thing. It means that I'm living aware of the love of God for me. I'm living aware of the fact that I have in my heart the love of God that I share in his life. And Jesus, of course, was always that because he was the eternal Son of God always. Well, then how do you account for the cross in the life of Christ? And the fact that he uttered the cry, right, that my God, why hast thou forsaken me? He really suffered on the cross, and he really plumbed the depths of human suffering. How can you plumb the depths of human suffering and remain joyful? And what Aquinas tells us is that the one thing is that he was in the beatific vision. He knew at all times what God was and who God was because he is God, right? And yet in his humanity, during his passion, he remained in the beatific vision, remained, of course, who he was, the Son of God, beholding the Father, but his humanity was permitted to not enjoy the effects of that union. So charity in the fullness of God was in his soul, but he did not feel it. On the contrary, he was allowed to feel the absence of it. And there were just at a mystery, what was that like? I mean, these are the mysteries of things, right? But it allows us to, recognize that Jesus was fully God, and yet he also fully understood the miseries of our humanity, but that he was also always joyful. This does not mean, again, that he was always happy or, not at all. That would almost be a mockery of the cross and the truth of his suffering. But that does allow us to get what I'm trying to say with today's message to you, right? And that is that you can really be joyful and at the same time be suffering from all kinds of different trials on the inside and out. Because even though you're suffering and you're feeling that, and that's no joke and nothing to make light of, at the same time, you can know that your life is aligned with God, that God is with you, and that by your faith, it's not that you're going to feel it. People talk about that all the time, that they feel God, they know the angels are around them. Well, that's a wonderful thing, but faith is not about your feelings. And there's a lot of people that don't feel God. And in fact, what you're going through is so difficult that you say to yourself, like God doesn't even exist, or you wonder if you even believe. And believe it or not, there have been saints in the Catholic Church's tradition who have actually witnessed that they've gone through that they also felt as if they were rejected by God, as if God was not there. Saint Therese of the Child Jesus, for example, speaks of that. Saint Damien of Molokai speaks of that. Just to name a couple, I could go through all kinds of them. Saint Mother Teresa of Calcutta, there's another one. So the fact is, let's not oversimplify things and say, Christians are supposed to just be walking around smiling and radiant all the time. Of course, we may, if our faith is strong enough, but the reality of suffering can be overbearing. And we who are Christians live in that reality. It's not easy to get up and go every day into the office to face, all kinds of problems. Everything's great when your business is expanding and when you're making a huge, bonus every year. But when things are not expanding, and in fact, they're shrinking, and you're not going to get a bonus this year or even a paycheck, and then, of course, your bills mount, and you find yourself facing foreclosure, it's not a lot of fun. You're not like, boy, I just love my job. When my boss is not a good boss and treating me poorly, or when my employees have nothing but problem after problem after problem for me to solve. In fact, a lot of our careers can really feel like the grind. I think about the same thing with young moms, right? You get these young mothers and they're just radiant with the beauty of motherhood when everything's going well. But when one kid is sick in the hospital and the other two are fighting and, the husband isn't paying any attention to her. And, that overwhelm and that depression is a very, very real thing. And we all know it. And you say, well, where is God in the midst of that? And this is what I'm trying to drive home with you. A Christian will really suffer, and a Christian might feel even as if there is no God or as if they're not sure of things. That's when faith begins, right? What we have to do is at those moments choose to throw the truth of God as an anchor for our souls deep into the depths of our problems. We just drop that anchor. We're like, you know what? For all that I'm facing right now and all that I'm going through, I choose to believe in the resurrection. I choose to believe in the love of God for me. And I choose to believe that you're here right now, God, period. I believe. And then you walk forward in that faith. And I understand it's a trial. It is a real trial to believe. It is not easy to keep your faith. We need to be friends and befriend people who are going through those challenges and those dark nights. We need to become their best friend. We need to show them love. We need to give them encouragement. But we also need to remind those who are tempted by despair of the truth of their faith. That is, that faith is a choice that I make to respond to God's truth. And the truth is, for example, the sun is shining. The sun is always shining. Even if it's night outside, the sun is shining somewhere. Even if you can't see the sun under the clouds, behind the clouds, the sun is still shining. And so someone in faith says, Jesus Christ is risen from the dead, period. God loves me, period. God is with me now, period. Regardless of how I feel. That light, that truth gives us a key that allows us to endure things others would not endure. And to embrace the real grind, the real difficulty of our suffering in the light of that faith. Meaning that if that's the truth, then I will act accordingly. And notice, nowhere do I say that that's going to, suddenly make you happy and radiant. You're going to jump up and down. And I hear a lot of Christian music, and there's a lot of Christian songs that kind of make it feel that way. And I appreciate that. I like positive music. We all need positive messaging in our lives, but you can't take everything too literally. Sometimes everything turns bright and you move forward in great happiness. But you do not need to see or feel or know that in a human way for it to be true. It's like St. Peter says. He says in 1 Peter 5:6, he says, bow humbly under the mighty hand of God, and he will lift you high. Cast all your cares upon him who cares for you. What does this mean for us? It means that we need to enter into that grind and that challenge that's in front of us in the light of that faith. And when we do that, in the light of that faith, we can know something that's deeper than an emotional gratification or the things that come when everything's going great in our life. We can know Christian joy, the knowledge that what I'm going through, I'm supposed to go through, and that what I'm going through has a purpose far greater than myself. And this is so important for us because it becomes an advantage for us that we get to take into our leadership.
Would you like to hear more from Father Nathan? Join the St. John Leadership Network and receive a 2-minute glance at the gospel every Sunday morning right to your phone. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
Now, you all know that I like to give you the original sources for what we talk about here, because I don't want you to think that this is just something that's being made up. It's actually coming from the deep traditions of our Catholic faith. And here I want to speak with you about where it's coming from. St. Thomas Aquinas actually writes about joy in this book that he wrote called the Summa Theologica. Right? It's a Latin title. And in the second part of that book, question 28, article 2, I know that sounds very fancy, but some people actually, are looking that up. And I think I want to give that reference. He asks the question, can joy know the admixture of sorrow? Right? Can you really be in a grind phase in your work where you are toiling, where things are not going well, where, think about it, the examples abound, right? Like you have a presentation and it's going to be in a half an hour and your laptop, fails at that moment. Look, why didn't the laptop fail at a different moment? Why does it always happen a half an hour before the presentation, Or you go into an interview and they ask you all the questions you did not prepare for, and you can tell that you're not going to get the job because you answered so poorly, and these questions that if they'd asked you the right ones, it would have worked out fine, but they asked you the wrong ones. And now you find yourself, facing challenges. Life often looks like an uphill climb. The laundry never stops. The house always needs to be cleaned again. Education for, children is always more expensive. Schools always seem to increase the rates. Everything just becomes harder and harder. And so we can say to ourselves, well, this means obviously that life is very difficult and then you die, to paraphrase a famous expression. And then you go to church and you hear priests and, maybe some religious sisters, and they're always talking about the joy that we should have. And people wish you joy for Christmas. And, and you look around and you're like, there might be a time in my life, maybe when I retire and I'm living like a king in Patagonia, and everything is great. Maybe then I'll be able to say that I'm joyful. But until then, I just have my nose to the grindstone and I'm just hoping to make it through another work week. And so because we feel that way, and then you're surrounded by so many people that say, oh, I felt God this week and God told me this and God told me that. And I felt this way or that way about, God, he sent his angels and they surrounded me, whatever. We have all these different ways that we talk about faith that makes it seem unrealistic, almost separated from the reality of the challenge of the drudgery. Right? The fact is, anytime one of us begins to do something, to make an impact, to step up in leadership, and to try to make something happen, we have to be willing to pay the price for the final goal. As soon as you stop paying the price, you start to go backward. Because as soon as you stop making progress forward, everything catches up around you. I mean, life is not a plateau that we can just continue on. The challenge of going either uphill or downhill is as real as the challenges of our life. The moment you plateau out, your job could be at stake. Next thing you know, you lose your job. They find you to be irrelevant, for example. That's just, one example. But you can also think about the reality of your health. I mean, you might be able to plateau out for 4 or 5 years, but very soon your health changes and suddenly you find yourself again at that position of challenge. And I want to embrace that position of challenge. And I want you to embrace that position of challenge because that's the moment of glory right there. Because if we go through the grind and embrace that challenge and climb that next mountain, that next hill, then we're going to find ourselves able in a position to reap the reward that comes with it. But if we don't and we quit, there's absolutely nothing that we're going to do that's going to guarantee our success. And before you know it, your success goes right out of your hands. And I think it's amazing, but to find that in our faith life, we follow a Christ who faced challenge after challenge after challenge all the way up until he climbed that last hill of his life's journey, the Mount of Calvary, and offered his life there for the salvation of the world. He died literally climbing a mountain, right? And maybe it was to inspire all of us that just feel like the mountains never stop. Maybe they're not supposed to. Maybe, in fact, those mountains are willed by God in our life to allow us to go deeper than a life that's all about us and to strive for something that's eternal, something that doesn't end, something that's spiritual, something that's there for other people, and that gives me a satisfaction that's more profound and enduring than the thrill that comes from comfort. In fact, I don't say maybe, I know this is the case. Because when Jesus was on the cross, he was not comfortable, and yet he was joyful. Again, not in a way you could feel at all, but because he knew the truth of God. And he gives us an example of, he went all the way through, even until death, without denying his faith and without rejecting the Father. Isn't that amazing? Even though he felt the full pain that souls would feel if they were separated from God, in his sacred humanity, according to Aquinas, he could feel that full weight even while never leaving the beatific vision and always remaining totally united to the Father. And so he gives us an example that yes, the sufferings and challenges of our jobs, of our leadership are real. The sacrifice of our time, of our money, of our energy, even of our, to embrace the anxieties of taking risks in your business. It's so hard to run a business. All you do is take one risk after the next for the sake of your people, and you rise to that next challenge. Or in your family where it's never going to plateau because as soon as your kids are all reared and out of the home, you know what happens? They make grandkids. And then you've got to start the cycle all over again. And you got to go back and teach them how to live, and do it as their grandparent. It's going to be work. Work is just a part of the human life. It will never leave us. And as long as we have to work, there's going to be that challenge and the sacrifice that comes with it. But you know what else happens when we work? We don't just sacrifice. We realign the pain that we're going through or the challenges, the stretchings, the endurance that's being called from us. We realign that with our ultimate goal. And that's where the joy comes in. Knowing that even though while on earth I might be slogging through the mud for what seems an eternity, in fact, I'm glorifying God and I'm doing the mission that he gave me to do. And there is profound joy. Not, again, necessarily happiness with it. Maybe you don't feel it, but to know that your life is on that right path and to know that God is on the other side of your sacrifices, receiving them, well, that's a flourishing of love. That's a depth of soul. That's a spiritual awakening. And that's your right and privilege as a Christian, because as Christians, we share in that love of God always. Even if we don't feel it, he's there. And if he's there, well, then we can know joy.
Would you like to start your Thursday mornings with a scriptural leadership lesson? Join the St. John Leadership Network, where Father Nathan hosts a 30-minute call at 6:30 a.m. in all 4 U.S. time zones. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
I'd like to share with you a story from my own, small existence, in my own labors. As I was working one time in a very difficult circumstance to try to advance, the various things that I had going on, I remember I was complaining to one of my mentors. I called him up on the phone because I just needed a shoulder to cry on, I guess. And I was talking with this mentor of mine who's been through a lot in his own life, accomplished many great things. And I didn't quite know what he was going to say to me after I kind of unburdened myself about this or that challenge I was facing. But I'll never forget what he told me. He said, "Yes, Father Nathan, your life is very hard. You've chosen a hard pathway. But aren't you glad that you have the chance to walk it? Your life might be a hard one, but aren't you glad you have the chance to live it?" And you know what? That really got me thinking. It got me thinking, because here I was thinking that the problems I had were the problems. And it's not, having problems is not the problem. Having problems with having problems, that's the problem. And that's what my mentor was able to point out to me. It's like, why would I look at all of this from the negative? Thinking, well, you know what? This is going to take me 10 years of my life to get through. You might think that. You might say, okay, I'm going to apply for, a PhD program, right? And if you do that, you're like, well, it's going to take me 4 years and it's going to cost me tens of thousands of dollars to earn this. And then you're only focusing on the negative because you say, well, then is it worth it? And this and that, But what if you were to look at the positive and say, my goodness, I'm enrolling in a PhD program. What an absolute grace and opportunity. Yes, it will be a challenge. Yes, it will cost me time and resources I'll never get back. I'm going to sacrifice them, though, for the sake of the goal that I have in mind. In other words, my love, if indeed you are doing this right, and if indeed you're living in your Christian faith, then what you're doing, you're supposed to be doing out of love for God, right? You get to be doing out of love for God, and you get to be doing to make you a better gift to your neighbor, to qualify yourself in some way or the other so that you can bring more of an impact to our world. That's an amazing thought. And we just focus in on, well, I don't know, it's going to be really hard, thank goodness that it's hard in a sense, because since it's hard, it now has value. And if it's got value, well, that makes me joyful because I'm doing something great for Christ and not just something small for myself. I'm actually trying and striving. If you are animated by true charity, true love, and if that's really at the heart of where you're at, well, then joy is a constant in your life. You might not feel it. You might feel just the contrary, but the joy of the truth is such a strength for the Christian soul. So remember that if you want to complain about your life like I did and all you're suffering and going through, remember that quote, aren't you glad that you have the chance to live it? Aren't you glad you got a chance to swing your scythe and harvest that wheat for Christ? What else are we going to do with our time, everybody? When you really think about it, what else are we living for? If we're not living for love and living out of love, then we're really wasting our time. And so the real choice is therefore to lean into your faith and lean into your religion, to go to mass more, to pray more often, to be more fervent, because the more that we lean into that faith, well, the more that the truth of God's love becomes our guide, even when we don't see the way ourselves. Well, that's the privilege of being a Christian, and that's we get to work with joy, even in the midst of the grind. For Aquinas, anyway, St. Thomas Aquinas, he says, look, the joy of charity itself is incompatible with any admixture of sorrow, because if you're really in charity, then you're in union with God. And that's why St. Paul, the apostle, can say in Philippians 4:4, rejoice in the Lord always, right? So he was not being a Pollyanna about this. He was not saying that suffering doesn't exist and you should just choose to be happy. No. How you should interpret that line from St. Paul is to say that a Christian should be fundamentally optimistic, fundamentally pointed towards heaven, fundamentally saying that God will triumph in the end, and they're all therefore always capable of having joy, of rejoicing, because we know that Christ is risen from the dead and is seated at the right hand of the Father, and we're going to be with him. Where the sorrow comes in, says St. Thomas Aquinas, is that sometimes we're not able to enjoy the fullness of that truth. Life is very hard and hardships come our way. You know, children get sick and people die whom we are close to, and we get banged up by life. And Aquinas says, yes, that will hinder our joy and cause sorrow in our hearts at a certain level. And that's why you can stay joyful even while knowing sorrow, because the sorrow that we know is wherever our life is not able to fully enjoy, whenever we're not in heaven, basically. It's only going to be in heaven that it's going to be constant and ever enjoyment of joy. While on earth, we'll always know joy with an admixture of sorrow. But for that same reason, therefore, I think we need to learn to embrace the grind. What joy could be ours if we were able to say, I'm doing this for you, for your children, for your spouse. This is my gift, like a candle that gives off light and heat by consuming itself, right? And the longer that it burns, the less of it there is. So a human heart is not called to be, just not lit on fire because we want to preserve ourselves. On the contrary, it's like light the flame, and that will burn energy in years and time, yeah. But we'll be doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing. We'll be making an impact for God. We'll be bringing his love into this world. We'll be lifting everyone else up. And will it cost us? Yeah, it'll cost us our own inadequacy and mediocrity. That's what it'll cost us. But what will we get out of it? Everything. In the end, it'll cost us our nothingness and give us our everything. That's the wonderful paradox that comes from embracing the grind with the love of Christ.
Dare great things for Christ.
Share your feedback with Father Nathan. Send us an email at communications@stjohninstitute.org. That's communications@stjohninstitute.org. And visit www.stjohninstitute.org and sign up for our newsletter to receive updates from Father Nathan.